Choose one of us. Either she goes or I do. Those were the words my daughter-in-law Jessica screamed across my own kitchen counter. I was 60 years old, standing beside the stove, holding a dish towel. My son David stood between us. He did not look at me. He looked at the floor, his shoulders hunched, completely folding under the weight of his wife's demand. For months, Jessica had been pushing me toward the edges of my own home, taking over the living room, rearranging my kitchen, and treating me like an unpaid housekeeper. I had stayed silent, believing that harmony was better than being right. But harmony, it turned out, was just a synonym for my absolute surrender. David finally looked up. He walked over to the cabinet beneath the sink, pulled out a black plastic trash bag, and handed it to me. His voice barely cracked a whisper. "Mom, you need to leave. Just take what you need for now." I did not scream. I did not drop to the floor and weep. I took the plastic bag from his trembling hand. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, the room I had slept in for 30 years, and filled the bag with 3 pairs of pants, my favorite shirts, my medications, and my comfortable shoes. I grabbed my purse containing my wallet and my identification. When I came back downstairs, Jessica stood by the front door, arms crossed, a triumphant smirk resting on her face. She thought she had won. She believed she was taking over a fully functioning, financially stable household. She didn't realize the foundation was walking out the door. I paused at the entryway, pulled my house key off my key ring, and placed it quietly on the entryway table. "Goodbye, David," I said. I walked out into the cool evening air, the heavy wooden door clicking shut behind me. I had nothing but a trash bag. But as I walked down the driveway, I realized they had made a severe miscalculation. I walked 4 blocks to a small diner I had frequented for years. I sat in a booth near the back, ordered a black coffee, and placed the black plastic bag on the seat beside me. The waitress, a kind woman named Sarah, gave me a puzzled look, but knew better than to ask. I took a sip of the bitter coffee and let the reality settle over me. I was 60, practically homeless, and discarded by the boy I had raised. But I was not helpless. David and Jessica assumed I had left with absolutely nothing. They assumed I was dependent on the house and on them. What David had conveniently forgotten was that when my husband passed away 5 years ago, I didn't put the life insurance payout into our joint checking account. I placed it in a separate account at a different bank across town. I had intended to use it for his inheritance to help them with the mortgage, if times got rough. I pulled out my phone and booked a room at a modest motel a few miles away. I paid for a week in advance. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpets, but the lock on the door was solid. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress and opened my notebook. I didn't waste time mourning a family that didn't want me. Instead, I made a list. I wrote down the utilities, the internet bill, the grocery delivery subscription, and the property taxes. All of these were tied to the debit card in my wallet. They wanted the house. They could have the house. And every single financial obligation that came with it. I closed my notebook, turned off the bedside lamp, and slept better than I had in months. Tomorrow, I had errands to run. At 9 o'clock the next morning, I stood in the lobby of my bank. I sat down with a teller and began the quiet process of untangling my life from my son's. I canceled the automatic payments for the electricity, the water, the gas, and the high-speed internet at the house. I withdrew my name from the shared credit card David used for emergencies, which usually meant Jessica's expensive dinners. "Are you sure you want to cancel all these auto drafts?" "Victoria," the teller asked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Positive," I replied smoothly. I no longer reside at that address. With my finances secured, I walked to a local real estate office and found a small 1-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It was simple on the ground floor with a tiny patio facing a patch of oak trees. I signed the lease, paid the first and last month's rent, and picked up the keys. By Wednesday afternoon, I had unpacked my trash bag into a real closet. I bought a comfortable mattress, a coffee maker, and a sturdy armchair from a thrift store. I didn't answer the 2 text messages David sent that week asking where I was. I simply blocked his number from ringing and let it go to voicemail. I needed space, and I needed absolute control over my own environment. I started looking for part-time work, something to keep my hands busy and my mind sharp. I found a job at a local plant nursery watering ferns and organizing flower pots. My life was becoming small, quiet, and entirely my own. The noise of Jessica's constant complaining was gone, but I knew the peace wouldn't last forever. Eventually, the bills were going to arrive in the mail. It took exactly 3.5 weeks for the lights to go out in the house they took from me. I was repotting a large monstera plant at the nursery when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I wiped the soil from my hands and looked at the screen. It was David. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, he called again. This time, I answered. "Mom, where are you? The power company just shut off our electricity." Panic tightened his voice. They said the bill hasn't been paid and the account was closed. I picked up my small watering can and moved to the next table. "That's correct," I stated plainly. "I closed the account." "But how are we supposed to pay for it?" Jessica's furious. "All the food in the fridge is going to spoil. You need to call them and turn it back on. Put it on your card." "David," I said. Keeping my tone perfectly even, you asked me to leave. I left. "I am not paying the utilities for a house I do not live in. You are a grown man. Call the power company and set up an account in your name." "Mom, come on. We don't have that kind of money right now. You know Jessica is between jobs." "Then I suggest you buy some candles," I replied. I didn't wait for his response. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. My hands didn't shake. I felt a profound sense of clarity. For years, I had buffered them from the realities of adult life, softening every blow, paying every unexpected expense. Now they were standing in the dark, entirely on their own. I went back to watering the ferns, enjoying the smell of damp earth. My routine at the nursery became my sanctuary. I enjoyed the physical labor, the quiet conversations with customers, and the simple exchange of money for a day's work. I was standing by the register on a Tuesday afternoon when the front door chimed. I looked up and saw Jessica pushing an expensive stroller through the aisles, her face flushed with irritation. She marched straight toward the counter. "So this is where you've been hiding," she scoffed, looking around the greenhouse with clear disdain. "Your son is stressed out of his mind, and you're playing in the dirt." I wiped down the counter with a cloth. "Can I help you find a specific plant, Jessica?" She crossed her arms, ignoring my question. "We need you to come over on weekdays. I have errands to run, and daycares are too expensive. Since you're just working at a plant shop, you can easily quit and watch the baby. It's your grandchild. You owe us some help, especially after leaving us with all those bills." I looked at her. She genuinely believed that throwing me out with a trash bag was a temporary punishment, and that I would eagerly return to be her unpaid servant. I reached under the counter, pulled out a small printed brochure on how to care for indoor succulents, and slid it across the glass toward her. "I work here from 8 to 4. My evenings are for myself. I am not a babysitter, and I am not coming back to that house." Jessica's face turned bright red. "You're being selfish. Families help each other. Families do not hand their mothers trash bags," I replied softly. "Have a good afternoon, Jessica." I turned my back and walked toward the stockroom. She yelled something after me, but the heavy wooden door shut, cutting off her words completely. Over the next 2 years, I flourished. The silence that used to scare me became my favorite companion. I saved my wages from the nursery and combined them with a portion of my late husband's insurance money. I bought a small, beautiful condo on the edge of a quiet neighborhood. I painted the walls a soft, sage green, planted a small vegetable garden on the patio, and adopted a senior cat named Barnaby. I learned to cook just for one. I joined a morning walking group with a few women from the nursery. I was healthy, well-rested, and completely in control of my own front door. Meanwhile, the reality of my absence weighed heavily on David and Jessica. Without my financial padding, their lifestyle crumbled. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they had to sell Jessica's luxury SUV and buy an older sedan. They stopped taking weekend trips. The house began to fall into disrepair. David left voicemails every few months, usually fishing for money. The lawnmower broke. The water heater leaked. Jessica needed dental work. I listened to each voicemail once, and then I pressed delete. I did not owe them rescue. I had given them my time, my money, and my home, and they had decided it wasn't enough. They had made their bed with supreme confidence, and now the springs were digging into their backs. I felt no guilt. I felt only a profound sense of self-respect. I was sitting on my patio drinking Earl Grey tea and watching Barnaby sleep in the sun when I realized I hadn't thought about the trash bag in months. I had moved on. But then the 3-year mark arrived and my doorbell rang. It was a rainy Tuesday morning. I looked through the peephole of my condo and felt my stomach tighten. David and Jessica stood on my welcome mat. They looked exhausted. David had dark circles under his eyes and his posture was stooped. Jessica looked thinner, her usual arrogant glare replaced by a nervous, twitchy energy. I unlocked the deadbolt, but kept the sturdy metal screen door shut and locked between us. I stood in the entryway, my hands resting comfortably in the pockets of my cardigan. Mom, David said, his voice cracking immediately. "Please open the door. It's freezing out here." "You can speak from there," I answered. Jessica pushed past his shoulder, pressing her face close to the screen. "Victoria, please. We need your help. We're drowning. The bank is threatening foreclosure on the house. David got laid off 2 months ago, and my part-time job doesn't cover the mortgage. We have nothing left." I looked at the house they were desperately trying to save. It was the house they had kicked me out of. "We just need a loan," David begged, gripping the handle of the screen door. "We know you have Dad's insurance money. Just enough to catch up on the mortgage. We'll pay you back. I promise, Mom. We'll even clear out the guest room. You can come back and live with us again." I stared at the two of them. They were offering me my old prison cell, pretending it was a gift. They expected me to empty my sanctuary to save the home where they had humiliated me. I watched Jessica shift her weight, clearly hating that she had to ask, but desperate enough to do it. The rain picked up, tapping heavily against the metal awning above them. David's knuckles were white as he held onto the screen door, waiting for me to break. He was waiting for the mother who always fixed his mistakes, the woman who always put herself last to keep the peace. "Mom, please, David," whispered water dripping from his coat. "We are family." I looked at my son, truly looking at the man he had chosen to become. I remembered the heavy black plastic of the trash bag in my hands. I remembered the sound of my own front door locking behind me while I stood on the sidewalk with nothing. They hadn't cared if I had a roof over my head. They hadn't cared if I had food to eat. I took a slow breath, feeling completely grounded in my own home, standing on the floorboards I owned, paid for by my own quiet resilience. I looked David straight in the eyes, and I gave them my answer. "You packed my value into a trash bag 3 years ago, so there is nothing left here to give you." Jessica's jaw dropped. David froze, his mouth slightly open, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He blinked, expecting me to soften, expecting the inevitable compromise. But there was no compromise left in me. Before either of them could formulate another excuse, another plea, or another manipulation, I reached forward. I calmly pulled the heavy wooden door shut, the latch clicking firmly into place, leaving them entirely on the outside. I engaged the deadbolt and walked into my kitchen. I didn't look out the window. I turned on the kettle and prepared myself a fresh cup of tea. Outside, I heard David knock on the door twice heavily. "Mom, you can't just leave us like this." His voice came muffled through the thick wood. Then Jessica's voice cut through shrill and angry. "Let's go, David. I told you she was cold. She doesn't care about us." I poured the hot water over my tea leaves and watched the steam rise. Jessica was right about one thing: I no longer cared to save them. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of their car engine starting and fading down the street. I picked up my phone, opened my contacts, and permanently deleted both of their numbers. I had kept them unblocked for 3 years, a tiny, lingering thread of maternal hope that they might call to apologize, to ask how I was doing. But they only came when the money ran out. The thread was finally cut. I walked over to my hall table, opened the small drawer, and took out the spare key to David's old car, a key he had given me years ago to run errands for him, which he had never bothered to ask for back. I dropped it into the kitchen trash can. It landed with a soft, definitive thud among the coffee grounds. I was done carrying the keys to doors I no longer wished to open. 3 years and 4 months after I walked out of my old house, the final chapter of that life officially closed. I was drinking my morning coffee and browsing a local real estate website when a familiar exterior caught my eye. It was my old address listed under a glaring banner: bank owned, short sale. I clicked through the digital gallery. The beautiful rose bushes I had meticulously tended for decades were entirely dead, reduced to dry, thorny sticks. The front porch, where I used to sit with my late husband, was covered in peeling paint and littered with broken patio furniture. The kitchen, where Jessica had screamed at me, looked dark and neglected. The house looked completely exhausted. They hadn't just lost the mortgage, they had lost the actual heartbeat of the home. I read in the community paper that David and Jessica had been forced to downsize to a cramped, noisy rental on the industrial outskirts of the county. I didn't reach out to gloat, and I certainly didn't reach out to offer financial assistance. Their lives were their own to manage, and I finally had my own to live. My reality, on the other hand, was blooming in every sense of the word. The nursery had officially promoted me to shift manager. It came with a modest but comfortable salary bump, and more importantly, it gave me the joy of teaching younger employees how to nurture fragile roots until they grew strong. Every Friday, I deposited my paycheck into a bank account that had only my name on it. By the end of that year, I used my savings and a portion of my careful investments to pay off the remaining balance on my condo. I held the deed in my own 2 hands. It was just a single piece of paper, but it felt heavier and more valuable than gold. I spent my weekends reading on my sunlit patio, harvesting tomatoes from my garden, and occasionally hosting Sarah the waitress from the diner for Sunday brunch. She had become a dear friend, someone who knew the value of hard work and honest company. I had learned a vital, unshakable lesson over these last few years. Strength does not mean enduring disrespect until you collapse. It doesn't mean being the endless shock absorber for other people's bad decisions. Strength means knowing exactly when to quietly pack your things, leave the key on the table, and build a new house where no one can ever tell you to leave. I was not a victim of my daughter-in-law's cruelty, nor was I a casualty of my son's cowardice. I was just a woman who finally learned the true, unapologetic cost of her own peace. As I sat in my comfortable armchair that evening, listening to Barnaby purr softly against my lap, I looked around the beautiful, quiet space I had built. I smiled, took a slow sip of my warm tea, and simply enjoyed the profound silence. Everything I had, I owned completely. And no one could ever pack my life into a trash bag again. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever stayed too long in a room where your presence wasn't valued, or if you are currently trying to find the courage to walk away and rebuild your life, please share your experience in the comments below. We read every single one. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who needs a quiet reminder that it is never too late to start over. You are worth far more than what they are willing to give you. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.